How to build the perfect barn, that's the question, and today we're going to dive into some of the details. So I released a video a few weeks ago about our barn design here at Riverbend and features that I've come to learn over the years are really important for a barn of any size, but things that just work well, particularly for the homesteader. This isn't necessarily a barn for horse people or a dairy operation or even a solely beef operation. This is much more, you got to think homesteading, multiple animals, and the things that go on a homestead. And got a whole lot of positive feedback, but I got two themes. And the biggest one was just wish I would have dived into the details some more. So that's what we're going to mostly do today, if this little girl right here will let me talk. So we're going to mostly dive into the details that you guys asked about that maybe I didn't cover well enough in the last video. So cool, happy to do that. There were a few comments about the size of the barn and the unrealisticness of it. And those of us that are maybe doing YouTube and doing this for a while, and we've got this infrastructure and whatnot, and how it's not really applicable to the average homesteader. And I get it. This is a huge barn. Part of it was here. It was just a pole building when we got here, so we were blessed to get it with the property. It had a generally good size, and then we've done a lot of work over the last 6 years to make this work for us. My whole point in the video, in the last video and this one, is not the size of the barn. It's the modularity that this can be done on micro scale, and we'll talk about it, to meet any homesteader at any level, and yet build it in a way so that if you do grow on your homestead and you do scale up, you can add on to it seamlessly without, just a lot of funky additions and not having it thought out. So we'll cover some of that in the details, but I just wanted to address this. And I get it, this barn is big, it serves us. We feed 15 people at the table every day. So our infrastructure here to get us both through summer out on the pasture and through winter here in the barn has to accommodate that scale. I want to thank you guys watching and those that are members of Homesteading Family and School of Traditional Skills, because those things have allowed us to do some of these things and provide for ourselves. But we've been there, we've had no infrastructure. The shelter for the cows is the woods and the trees. We're digging out the snow from under the hay and, hauling water and all those things. That's part of the homesteading life and the homesteading journey. But all of us want to get to systems that work better. That's what this is about, is creating systems that work better. And what I'm showing you here, you can apply at any scale and just about any budget if you got enough money to build a small structure, even 12 by 12. All right, so let's dive into the details. Let's talk about scale for a second and starting small. This is built to scale, you're only going to scale up, you're not generally going to scale down once you've built something, but they're built in 12 by 12 stalls. And that is the smallest scale I would go if I was building a structure. So let's just say you just need a lean-to for one cow. Great, 12 by 12. It's in the pasture. Maybe it's just got 3 walls and an open side for a cow or a few sheep. That's fantastic. But what that allows you to do, even that, if you place it right in your property, which we'll talk about that in a minute too, is that then you could put another 12 by 12 next to it. Eventually, you could add a breezeway if you wanted and a couple 12 by 12s over here. And you can extend that. You can build the lean-tos, you can add out. And so that's the point that I want you to take away with. It's not the size of this barn. This barn is built off of what was here when we got here and what we've wanted over the years. But you can literally start that small with a very small budget to get yourself going or to meet you with whatever animals that you have. But it's important, I would not do less than 12 by 12, and I would build it in the post fashion and the other things that go with the barn so that you have that flexibility to add on to it as you grow. That's what's really important. If you don't get anything else out of that, just take that away. 12 by 12 increments, 16-foot breezeway. When you get to a breezeway, you don't have to start with one. Ideally 16-foot high. Again, you can go watch the other video for some of those details if you haven't seen that yet. But start with that modularity and build it, whatever your scale is. That leaves you room to scale up and to meet your needs as you grow or as you can afford to. Okay, so let's talk about a couple other design features. A lot of you were concerned about cold weather. There was some talk about insulation and things like that. And there were a couple of varying degrees of opinion. First of all, you don't need insulation in a barn. Okay, animals are going to grow fur. They're made to be outside. It's not an expense you would want to go to. You see in the background, this has some old insulation. We've had to, you know, lift it up a little bit, get it out of the way of the animals. We don't want the animals, obviously eating it, messing with it, making a mess out of it. It's not good for them. So you put insulation in, well, then you got to build another interior wall and you're starting to get like a house. It's an expense that you don't need to go to. So let go of the insulation. What you need is cover, okay, to protect from the elements and protection from breeze and wind. Even in cold, cold climates, and we're certainly not North Canada here. We're not Arctic Circle, but we're North Idaho. We're cold and we're cold for extended periods of time. You want to build a barn with ventilation. That is so very, very important because non-moving air that's moist and cold is where you start to create an environment, a health environment, and a problem for the animals. Add that to, say, bad manure management, and you're really gonna create a situation where you're gonna be dealing with a lot of sickness and a lot of health issues. While we want cover, we wanna keep our animals dry, we wanna keep them out of the wind, all right? We do want airflow. That's why across this barn, there are 4-foot openings in every stall on both sides. One, obviously that allows the animals to get outside, but that also allows some cross ventilation and we don't get cold, stale air in here. You do not want that. Now, I can see for certain environments where it would be nice to have doors to close for short periods of time in very windy, cold, inclement weather. If you're in an environment like that and you want barn doors on the ends and you want some slider doors, that's an additional expense. And so I would not recommend putting that in unless you're in an environment where you get very windy and very cold and say, so for a storm, that allows you to shut it down for a period of time. But you don't want to design it that way. You want good airflow and good movement. Do you need a hug? Do you need a hug? Hi, how's it going? Oh yeah, that feels so good. That feels so good. Let's talk about going up instead of out. This barn is single story, really, really long. And so there was some good conversation in the thread on the other video about going up. And going up can be very appropriate in certain scenarios. You got to think about a few things. On flat ground like this, while we have this, the only reason to go up would be for human use up above, which we could do, and we've talked about doing one day if we needed some additional space or an apartment for the kids or interns or something. Definitely we could go up in here. But as far as barn management for our terrain, flat's better. We don't want to haul hay up just to bring hay down. We don't want to haul grain up just to bring grain down. We certainly don't want to move animals up. So there's no need for it in our purpose, in our space. Yeah, there is some reasons where it's certainly cheaper square footage wise to go up than out. But again, you got to think about your usage. There's two main reasons you would go up in multi-story. One is a hillsided property. Absolutely. If your property is hilly and say, you know, you want multi-levels, put it in the hillside, the animals are down below, the feed is up above, but because it's on a hill, you're able to bring the feed in on level. You're not using machinery or human strength to take it up. That can be wonderful. So that hillside effect is the main reason today. Now, I know there's a lot of old barns where they have huge lofts, and back in the day where they free stacked hay, they had to have high volumes, and it made sense to get that hay up there and then feed down to the animals. Not that you couldn't do that today, but you know, I'm trying to think economics. To build something 2-story to store your hay in, you're going to spend a lot of energy getting that hay up. Yes, it's nice to feed. You could build systems to drop it right down, hay or grain. But you got to have a structure that carries that weight. Think about the hay, tons and tons of hay or grain. It would have to be a completely different structure than we have here. And so if you do want to do that, you just need to think about it. It's not necessarily cheaper because you're going to have to engineer a floor in here and a system to get that hay up there, and that floor is going to have to carry that hay and grain, which it's not like a normal house. It's mostly air with some furniture and people, right? You're going to fill that space with, you know, depending on your scale, tons and tons of hay. and that's got to be engineered. And if you do that, that's where you do need to get an engineer. You can build a pole barn, you can do a little bit of research. Most environments, you could build something yourself with somebody that knows construction. If you're going to build overhead and carry weight, you have got to have that engineered, and it's going to cost you a fair amount of money. Let's talk concrete for a minute. I mentioned concrete in the last video. Let's just talk about ground surface for a moment. There's a lot of different options, but for a barn, good old ground works pretty good. You really don't have to do more than that. You know, would concrete in here be ideal? Yeah, it'd be nice to be able to sweep it off, really clean it out, make things tidy. Yeah, it could be nice, but that's a huge expense, and you're already investing a lot into this space. So you do not need concrete in here. I intended that more just to be a nod to the reality that there are people that have concrete in their barns. And so then I've seen other people think like they've got to have concrete in their barns. It is not necessary, and I would not do it. Let me clarify that. I did talk about it and kind of bring out, yes, it's flat, it's a hard surface, it's easy to keep clean and work with, but it has a lot of deficiencies, as some of you guys brought out. Two main things. Well, there's actually three main things. It's a hard surface. It's not that great for your animals to be on all the time. While it's easy to clean, you certainly don't want your animals walking on it all the time. So you're going to have that much more bedding and everything underneath it, even though you're going to be able to keep that bedding free of rocks and whatnot. It holds cold. And so yes, it can have a tendency to be a lot colder, again, while you're going to need a lot more carbonaceous material on top of it. So I brought it out, not so much to support it or suggest it, just that I know some people do it, and then there's others that think they need to. It's a huge expense that you do not need to go through, and so I don't recommend it. While it has a couple upsides, these downsides we just talked about and that you guys brought out in the comments are much bigger downsides. So don't get into the trap of thinking, you know, this horse farmer or somebody that's got a certain situation that has concrete, that means you need to do that. You don't. Let's talk location, like actually where to put the barn, you know, particularly in relation to the house was some of the discussion, but there's a few things to think about, like where are you going to site your barn? I want to talk about just like organization of space first. And if you look at a lot of old farms and homesteads, you're going to see that the buildings were gathered together. They weren't too close, but there's a home, there's a garage or a shop, there's a barn, there's usually, you know, there's a garden close, and there's usually a common area, you know, of access to all of them between them. And so there was some distance, but they weren't too far. So there's no hard rule. Somebody asked a question about like how far from the house does it need to be? There's no hard rule. You don't want it right next to the house, but you don't want it too far away either. And, you know, the first thing people think about is smell. And, you know, I'll refer you to some of the other videos about barn management. If you've got smell, if you've got bad smell, let me say that, a barn has smell and it can be good and should be good. You know, if it smells like a sewage mess, then that's a management problem. That's not a location problem. And again, you can check out a couple of these other videos on that. We're not locating it by being worried about smell that much, okay? If you're building from scratch, you want a few things. You want good access, right? You need to have good access to it. You want to have a big open area where you can, you know, bring a truck and a trailer around or equipment, or if you've got hay getting delivered, you know, different things. So it needs to be in a spot that has good access. It needs to be in a spot that is away from the house, that your house still feels like a home and, you know, has its space, but you're not going to the other side of the property to get to it, right? And it's located relevant to, if you've got a barn, you've probably got animals, which means you've probably got pasture. So obviously it needs to be relevant to accessing those places too. So you've really got to think about access. Another important thing to think about might be wind, okay, and breeze. And, you know, barn does have a smell if you got a lot of animals in it. Even, you know, what I would call a good smell, but you may not want to smell that at your house. That's fine. Think about what your prevailing wind, your prevailing breezes, and put the barn downwind if you can. That's going to help with that, even though you don't want it too far away, but then you don't have to worry about that distance. Somebody asked about orientation. I'm in the northern hemisphere, so let's talk the sun being in the south. That's what we're thinking about. And we have cold winters. So we want to use some elements of passive design. And so you may want to position your barn, if you can, you know, lengthwise east to west, taking advantage of that low sun in the winter and allowing sunlight to get into your stalls on that side. Now, if you got a two-sided barn, you know, you're still gonna have a north side. Not much you can do about that. That would be my approach. That's a general, the correct approach when you're building structures and you want to take advantage of passive design and natural elements. Collect that sun in. Sun is also a sanitizer. Take advantage of that southern exposure. Maybe if you're building lean-tos like we have here, ideally, I wish this roof was a bit higher and I had a little bit more space. We can see the open area in there. I'd love it if that was several feet so that that could take more advantage of that southern sun getting inside the barn and reaching deep, say, into the other stalls. So there's just some things to think about like that. And if you're in a southern hemisphere and it's cold, you know, you want to think the opposite. Now, here's the other side. You may be in a desert environment, even in the northern hemisphere, where it's predominantly hot. And so you need the opposite effect. You need to situate yourself to shade things and shade the animals and give them relief. So those are the kind of things you want to think about in locating your barn. You want your barn, you know, and I'm talking flat ground, not hillside here, but you want to think about water either way. And you want to make sure you don't put it in a low spot. Okay, you've got animals, you've got manure. Hopefully you're managing that well with carbon, deep bedding. But even so, you don't want it in a bog. You don't want the terrain to drain water towards your barn. You want it to drain out. Watch out for those low spots. Try to pick a high spot. If the ideal spot is low, maybe you can get some fill. Maybe you can build it up a little bit. But you want to make sure that the water is moving away from your barn, not towards it. All right, let's talk about siding. What to put on your barn. This barn came with metal when we got here. All this that's here was here originally. And you guys brought up some good concerns about metal. One of them being for horses, and I'd say any large animals, this is possible with cows too, is that an animal could kick through it and get their leg stuck, which kicking through metal, getting their leg stuck would wound an animal seriously, potentially even fatally. So it's a good point that ideally, it would be nice to have the inside of the stalls have them wood or do wood on the outside. There's a couple things you got to think about. Wood is going to be way more expensive. So if we're talking homesteaders working on a budget, metal is going to be cheaper. Metal is going to be lower maintenance on the outside. And so it really is the least expensive, low maintenance, good option. And so you see more and more barns with metal on them. There's a good argument to the wood. Certainly aesthetically, wood's wonderful. I'd love to have an all wood barn. That would be beautiful. It's expensive. It's going to be higher maintenance. It can still get kicked through. Probably not going to have those issues. You know, if you've got horses, I've never seen a problem with the cows. I've seen a lot of barns. I get the point about horses. If you got horses, maybe you want to put wood up on the stalls on the inside or for a larger animal. It's really horses is the main one. Cows could do the same thing. I've never had that problem. I've not heard of anybody having that problem, but you could take stalls, and especially for the homesteader, you don't have a lot of cows. You probably don't have a lot of horses. If you want to put some 2x wood on the inside of those, that's going to be a lot less expensive solution than siding your entire barn with metal. So just something to think about. The other thing about metal is it can weep. It can gather condensation on it, especially on the roof, and drip. And yes, on the inside, this one does. The metal roof on the inside does, and it doesn't have a coating. So here's the thing to know. You can get coatings that are anti-weeping on metal roofs now. You're going to pay a little bit extra for it. And that's what we did both in the addition here and the cattle loafing area on the other end. Not so much that it hurts the animals, but it does drip on the hay and it is annoying to work under. So yeah, we do have a little bit of a problem inside with that. If you're going to do metal on your roof, which I highly recommend for a barn, it's going to be one of your least expensive ways to go. It's easy to DIY it. Just get that coating on it. That will help. Let's talk about space for animals. Somebody was particularly asking about how much space for a cow. So let me return to the original concept, 12 by 12 stalls. That's the smallest I would want for any animal. So a 12 by 12 stall for one cow, assuming it's got some space outside, is just fine. That's great, okay? So if you're dealing with, you got a dairy cow, make sure at least she's got a 12 by 12 space. If you can have a lean-to, great. Then make sure she's got whatever yard you can give her, whatever barnyard you can give her besides, you know, her pasture. That's the minimum I would go to for anything. Now, you were asking about this loafing area. This loafing area is about 1,800 square feet under roof, and they've got at least double that outside, not under roof, for their winter quarters. And so they've got that 12 by 12 per cow, plenty. I wouldn't do much more than about 12 cows in here, a little bit more because all of our deep bedding would build up. It'd get a little hard to manage for this space and feed the cows without modifying it. Not less than 12 by 12, make the loafing area so that your animals have got good access to water, they got good access to their feed, you've got room to get in and get out and deal with your deep bedding. As you can see, this is building, it's 2.5 feet, it's gonna be over 3 feet deep by the end of the winter. And I want to address, somebody asked, what are you using for bedding? It looks like potting soil. I want to tell you that that's a compliment to me. If you think it looks like potting soil, that means it's headed in the right direction. You can check out one of the other videos here. We'll link it for you here or down in the comments on the deep bedding method. We're just using carbon, predominantly wood chips or wood shavings, but go check out that video for deep bedding. So I want to cover one last question, which was, why do you put all your animals in the barn for the winter? Essentially, what's the fuss? Why have all of this? But it's a valid question. You don't have to have a barn to be having some animals and having a homestead. It depends on what you have. Why do we? Well, we live in North Idaho. We're covered in snow anywhere from 4.5 to 6 months out of the year. It's mushy, it's mucky, it's you know, it's all kinds of different things. So do all the animals have to have it? Could we go feed the cows out in the woods somewhere? Yes. Sheep? Yes. And just keep the goats. The goats need a little more protection. The pigs definitely need some protection. Chickens. So we need some spaces for them. But you get into management and efficiency. We've got snow on the ground that much of the year. That means we have to deal with that snow. We need a place to keep the hay protected. We need to be able to get around. So this makes our winter very, very efficient. All the animals are here. They've got a good place to be. Our efficiency of working with them, feeding them all year is all contained in this place. And that's one of the reasons this is so big. Instead of separate different buildings, we're able to, instead of have the cows out there with the cow shed or building and the sheep over here, they're all in one place. It's very, very efficient. Here's the other side of it, and that is manure management, which is really fertility management. It's going to pile up in the winter no matter what. Even if you have them out in the open, they're going to find their places they like to be, and they're going to put that manure there. Can you get that manure and distribute it? It gets harder when it gets out into the woods, and you're going to have to tear up more ground. In here, we can manage it. We can turn it into nice material while it's here and begin the decomposition process, and then it's easy to distribute where we want it and where we need it. And so that is a huge advantage, being that you know, we've got about 5 to 6 months of the year where those animals are going to end up, you know, accumulating manure somewhere, because they're not going to move around that much even on their own when the snow gets deep. So better we can control that process and make and create this fertility and then distribute it the way we want to across the farm. So all in all, for us, it's great. There are a lot of places where you don't need a big barn. You may be able to graze almost all year round, and with a little bit of hay when the snow gets deep for a short period of time, which you can go ahead and do out in pasture. That is fantastic. I mean, obviously make sure your animals have some woods, some cover, a shed or whatever. Don't think that you've got to have a barn this size or small or anything. You need to have what works for you. And so for more information on that deep bedding, which you really need to learn about, check out this video.